A bold move with big consequences. President Trump has just signed an executive order aiming to gut the Department of Education, a move that has sent shockwaves through the political landscape. His argument? The U.S. education system is failing, despite receiving billions in federal funding, and he believes power should return to the states. But does dismantling the entire department truly solve the problem? Or does this decision risk leaving millions of students vulnerable, especially those with special needs? Let's break this down. Why is this happening now? This move isn't just about education. It's about reshaping the federal government itself. Trump has long positioned himself as an outsider, vowing to slash bureaucracy, reduce government spending, and transfer power back to the states. But this strategy raises critical questions. Is smaller government always better? What happens to the crucial functions of the Department of Education? Who benefits the most, and who suffers? While supporters see this as a victory for state rights and school choice, critics warn that it weakens protections for vulnerable students and jeopardizes federal oversight on key educational policies. Have we seen this before? Yes. Efforts to weaken or eliminate the Department of Education have been around for decades. Ronald Reagan advocated for abolishing it in the 1980s, and Republicans have frequently pushed for decentralization. However, past administrations realized that federal oversight plays a crucial role in civil rights protections, funding equality, and accountability. Trump's move is the most aggressive yet, going as far as laying off 50% of the workforce and calling for a full dismantling of the PAO agency. Who wins and who loses? Trump argues that returning control to the states will improve educational outcomes. But is that true? Let's examine the real-world effects of this decision. Who benefits? State governments and local school districts. With fewer federal mandates, states have more control over curriculum, funding, and policies. Private and charter schools. School choice advocates support this move, as it could lead to more funding for private institutions. Republicans and small government advocates. For those who see federal oversight as government overreach, this is a huge win. Who suffers? Students with disabilities and low-income families. The Department of Education plays a key role in Title I funding, Pell Grants, and special education programs. Without federal oversight, will states maintain these protections? Public schools in low-income areas. School choice policies could divert funding away from struggling schools, further deepening inequality. Civil rights protections. The department enforces anti-discrimination policies in education. With mass layoffs and legal uncertainty, how will these rights be protected? This brings us to the biggest concern. Will states be able to replace the functions of the Department of Education effectively? Or are we risking a collapse of the federal support system for millions of students? A double-edged sword. One of the biggest drivers behind this move is school choice. Trump and Republicans argue that parents should have the freedom to send their children to any school they choose, including charter schools, private schools, or even homeschooling, rather than being forced into underperforming public schools. But here's the reality. In theory, school choice sounds great. In practice, it's more complicated. Not all students have access to private schools. Rural students, for example, may have no alternatives nearby. Public schools lose funding. When money follows the student, underfunded schools get even worse. Who really benefits? Data shows many families using school choice programs could already afford private education, meaning public funds are subsidizing the wealthy instead of helping low-income students. This makes Trump's plan highly controversial. Is it about improving education, or is it about shifting resources away from public schools to private institutions? What happens next? This will not be an easy fight. The executive order has already triggered lawsuits from education groups, civil rights organizations, and Democratic lawmakers. Key legal challenges. Does the president have the authority to dismantle the Department of Education without Congress? What? happens to federal student aid programs and special education funding? Who enforces anti-discrimination laws in education moving forward? Even if Trump's administration pushes forward, this decision will likely end up in the Supreme Court. Until then, uncertainty looms over the future of federal education policies. What comes next? Let's leave you with the most critical questions that will shape this debate. Will states have the resources to maintain key education programs without federal support? Will this lead to better educational outcomes, or just more inequality? Is this truly about fixing education, or is it a political move to shrink federal government power? What happens if lawsuits overturn Trump's decision? Will we see a reversal under a new administration? A risky experiment with America's education. Regardless of where you stand politically, this is one of the most significant changes to U.S. education policy in decades. If successful, it could reshape how American students learn. But if it fails, millions of students could suffer from lack of funding, resources, and oversight. So, what do you think? Is dismantling the Department of Education a bold step toward efficiency, or is it a reckless gamble that will hurt students? Let us know in the comments below.